Good morning. Good morning, and welcome to High Performance Self Coaching. High performance self coaching is something that I've come up with to apply the 7 fitness areas roadmap, which is what I use to help clients work through making the major transformations. I'll cover that fitness area in a moment. But when I started looking for this, I wanted a few things. So one, I got interested in this through a crazy set of events as a 5-year-old. And because I've had experiences in my single digit years and in my teen years, but it was never reliable. But I was always fascinated. And then when neuroscience came about and they were able to scan the brain and start seeing what's actually happening, it started connecting some of the dots. And I was able to map back to what I've been observing throughout my life: military sales operations, neurolinguistic programming, law of attraction stuff. And I had success, but it was never reliable. Now, an interesting side note is that when I look at placebos, placebos are not always reliable either. And a placebo is really the standard for a prescription drug. The drug has to be better than the placebo. Placebo can be as 30%, or it could be 50%. So we've got prescription drugs out there that are only reliable at the 30, 40%, 50% level, if that. And people still take them and don't worry about it. But that's okay. I still wanted a higher standard. I can't tell you what the standard is. Through data collection, I'll be able to come up with some view. But I think, and this is not mental health, it's about dealing with business and dealing with the challenges that business people face. I'd like to think it's above the 60, 70% level in terms of reliability. But here's the thing: the more you use it, the better it gets, because what you're doing is literally resetting your habits. So the same way habits are reliable, somebody may do some self-sabotage. The same way that's reliable, so is the automaticity that comes out from it. Now, the other thing I wanted to do was I needed something that I could talk to business people about. And what I mean by that, law of attraction came about in the late 1800s, along with many other ideas in the New Thought era. It was the philosophers and the printing press coming together, and so much information was published during that time. That's why they call it the New Thought era, because as philosophers were able to put their information in print more widely and distribute it more widely, others would read it, and then that would just keep jumping. So Ralph Waldo Emerson's Ralph Waldo Emerson's essays, that came about at that time. The work that went into Think and Grow Rich, a lot of that is consistent with what took place during those earlier years. William James, called the father of psychology, late 1800s, 1890 or so. But I wanted something that I could talk to business people about, because what happened, and folks trying to explain how all that stuff works, they get into this parallel universes and it's the energy. And I'm not going to take anything away from that. I don't know. I can't tell you about parallel universes. I can tell you that my view is consistent with what we know about energy using quantum physics. Quantum physics being that everything is atoms, rather than Newtonian physics, which looks at it more as a linear point of view. And that's another shift I think happened as we got later into the last century. And certainly now with the brain scanning available, we can see what's going on in the brain lighting up, and we can go back and test. And now there's peer-reviewed. That was what was missing before. The peer-reviewed scientific research was missing because you couldn't prove it. But now with areas of the brain lighting up, and a peer-reviewed research piece means that other researchers were able to get the same results. And that's the bar that I think we need for business people. So I will explain everything that I talk about without going into woo-woo. Now, that doesn't mean that first of all, I always say there's a spiritual realm, 100% believe that. There's a physical realm. If I twist my ankle, it's going to hurt. And then there's this space in between that we don't really understand. Epigenetics can be in there, but you explain it with epigenetics, that woo-woo gap gets narrower. Neuroplasticity could be in there, but as you explain neuroplasticity, that gap gets narrower. Heart-mind coherence can be in there, but as you explain that from a physiological standpoint, that gap gets narrower. And now what you have is, in my view, is the higher self. You have the higher self, which governs, helps us govern. It's the higher self that we're going to use to reprogram the subconscious. Most of us have been running a life that's 95% by habit. Most of us, in trying to change habits, have bumped up against the idea of the fox watching the hen house. You're literally attempting to break and change habits by going through the subconscious, which is itself all of the habits. So it's not that it's some nefarious thing. It's actually there to help us. The objective of the subconscious, going back to hunter-gatherer days, was to make sure that we survive long enough to procreate. So it's there for us. The challenge is now we're living in an environment that's very different from a hunter-gatherer. You can imagine a 0 to 7-year-old person in the hunter-gatherer time frame, and that's when the majority of the conditioning happens. That 0 to 7-year-old person would probably be living in the same kind of an environment 40 years later if they lived that long. Today, you take somebody who's born in 2000, the world is very different already for them, let alone a person born in the 50s or the 60s or the 70s. And that's just going to keep happening, because if you think about Moore's law, which says technology capability is going to double every 18 months, we're in the steep part of that curve. You double a penny 30 days, it becomes a $10 million. So that last 5 days of the month, or that 30 days, is very, very steep. So I wanted something that I didn't have to resort to woo-woo conversation that business people can grasp. And not only that, they can test. Now, again, it's not mental health. It's about business, taking advantage of business opportunities, limiting ourselves getting in our way. And not only that, once you understand how it works in yourself as a leader or as a salesperson, you can understand why sales presentations are the way they are, why best practices in leadership are the way they are. All right, now we're going to go into, so this is what I talked about. I also didn't want something that required hours of meditation. Nothing against meditation. I think is an important, very important tool. But some people are so far off, I shouldn't say off, but are so deep into stress response that meditating is the last thing they want to do. Other people have so much noise going on in their head that trying to sit down and meditate is just, it's a non-starter. So I also needed something that didn't require meditation to get there. It's like, yeah, just meditate, but I can't meditate. Well, if you meditate, you'd be able to meditate. So we have a step, and that's what I'll talk about, the 7 fitness areas. I mentioned relying, didn't want to rely on something that required woo-woo gap to explain it. I had to remove the fear of getting emotionally hijacked. Why? Because for the people who are over 50, you probably get this. From 30 to 50, we've tried things and got stopped. We tried things and got stopped. And by the way, if it doesn't work, society has us linking that up with failure. And let me just make sure. Yeah, society has us linking that up as failure. And I remind people that, in school, because you're learning something, every grade you're learning something new, 70% was passing. If you are trying something brand new in business and you're at the 65, 70% level, is sometimes working, sometimes not, you're still in the game and keep moving forward. But once we link this up that a setback or not doing it equals failure, then that creates some problems. By the time we're 50, it's very difficult to step into new things. And then we have this fear of failing, or even fear of success, because if we succeed, then it's a longer drop to if you fail. It makes it very difficult. And the reason I'm bringing it up now on this bullet with fear of getting emotionally hijacked out of state is that we have people who want to pursue something. They have the capability, they believe they can do it, but they just can't step across that line because they know that 13 years ago, 13 months ago, 13 weeks ago, they were emotionally triggered and went into this anxiety spiral, and everything fell apart. And they're worried about that happening. So we want to fix that. I want to get people to where, first of all, you don't have to fear it because it doesn't happen. But in the event that it does happen and some weird thing occurs and you get hijacked, we're still going to give you tools to get through that. And then I didn't want to require anything that an explanation that requires believing, right? You hear people say, "Oh, well, you just have to believe more. You're not believing enough. You just have to believe harder." Yeah, that doesn't work for business people. And whether you're analytical or not, when we're in business, because you got a profit and loss that you're dealing with, you're going to be in an analytical mode, and you're not going to rely on stuff that only works sometimes for your solutions. Now, here's the 7 fitness areas. 7 fitness areas. And my system locked up. Okay. 7 fitness, there it is. 7 fitness areas. The order is specific. It's you see at the bottom is be, do, have. It's about becoming first, and then doing the right things, managing or modulating your emotions, and then you can have what's on the right side. Too often, our society has us having first, going after the have, do, be. When you go after have, do, be, you can see how folks can get caught up in conspiracy theories because they just want an answer, or maybe they get caught up in corruption. They look for shortcuts, expediency. By going through this be, do, have, you first become that person, and then through that becoming, it naturally occurs that you can have those things that you want, assuming that you aligned your be with what you're going to want. And that's the purpose, that's self-actualization, and that's how it works. But this explains that thing where people talk about this stepping into whatever it was that they imagined. Yes, that is true. And we can explain how that works. And by using this roadmap, we can actually accelerate how that occurs. Let me close some things here because what I'm doing is my slides aren't working, and I've got to think about an alternative to make that happen without starting over again. Well, see if I stop sharing. I'm going to stop sharing the screen and then come back. And what I might do, I'm sorry, I'm thinking out loud here. Let's see. I'm going to go a different route here. This is not going to work. There we go. That was interesting. Bear with me, please. All right. All right. So we're just talking about the 7 fitness series, how you work on the left side, and then the emotional. One thing I wanted to say about this is I actually have clients, we run laps. Remember us talking about how some people can't get themselves to even meditate because things are just so wild or hectic in their mind. So we do some easy things first just to give them that space. And once we have that space, meditating for even a moment, even if you meditate for 1 minute, you're actually better off than not meditating for that 1 minute moment. And they're real. And by the way, the more you do those 1 minute moments, the easier it is for you to get into mindfulness, because you're creating the habit of getting into mindfulness. So we do some things like that, but we run these laps, and then you start working on the relationship, professional, financial, whatever your external goals are. And we find we're literally trying to break things. We're trying to break the something between the mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional, to find out where those weak spots are, and then we take care of them. And what I didn't mention is the mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional. These are in our control. See, that's the other piece. I wanted this to be largely in our control and not having to rely on something else. The relationship, professional, and financial, it's in, at least in part, in the control of somebody else. Which again is why the have, do, be, that order in that sequence creates some problems. When you go be, do, have, you become that person, things happen naturally. And it seems like it's manifesting or from the universe. And again, I wanted to be able to explain how this all works without having to resort to that. Now, the mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional, these are the areas. Each area has automatic resistance factors. They just hit, and they're different for everybody, which is why you can read a book, or somebody can tell you this process works, and then you do it and it doesn't work. Or why something worked 5 years ago for you and it doesn't work now. Well, the resistance factors may be different because you're in a different kind of a threat. And not only that, you may have worked through some of your limiting beliefs before, and now you're having to deal with another another layer of limiting beliefs. So each area has automatic resistance factors. When I'm working with a client, I can actually see what they are. I mean, they come out. They're telling you, because that was the whole basis of neurolinguistic programming. It's looking at the language to give you indicators what's going on in the nervous system. NLP is not a thing as in a discipline. NLP is modeling. What NLP did, they modeled some of the best. And in that process, they matched up the language and what was going on in the nervous system. And while it's consistent with what's going on with what they're learning and finding out and researching in neuroscience, I don't want you to think that NLP is a discipline in and of itself. It was modeling. And then what they did with NLP practitioners, and I certified in that, they taught them these patterns, and the patterns gave a lot of clues. And I think the patterns helped the neuroscientists in terms of the research, because it pointed them to where to look. So I will tell you, there's an opportunity to go further. This is not a sales pitch. In this session, we're going to actually teach. I'm going to be teaching, but I did want you to know that on October 17th, 7 a.m. Pacific time, and the features on my LinkedIn profile, but we will have a full workshop where you can actually learn and practice and do the steps that we're going through. I'll do some self-coaching, and then there's also some time afterwards. We'll go a total of 5 hours, 3 hours formally, and then an extra 2 hours for the group coaching pieces. But breakout rooms, exercises, group coaching, because I want you to leave there owning the skills. And we start small and then you build up. But once you start small and build up, then it becomes a habit. So now, a shift is going to be required in each of the areas. In the mental area, you have to be able to discern the conscious signals or messaging, communication versus the subconscious. We all have internal talk, and it's important to know when that internal talk is coming from the conscious mind versus the subconscious. And I will not call it a subconscious mind. It's a subconscious. It's a network of neurons, which I'll get into. Call it a conscious mind and a subconscious. Unconscious, I'll use as well, but I won't add the word mind on it because it's not a mind. Mind is much too powerful to give the credibility of the mind to the subconscious. Where the subconscious shines is its sheer speed, super fast, like orders of magnitude, like millions of times faster than the conscious mind. And that's why the subconscious ends up taking charge, because it's so fast. But we'll show you how to slow that down. Physical area, we're going to rethink cognitive processing. By the time you're done here, now, don't take my word for it. Do the research yourself. Google it, read, check. I'm just Google different things, read up on it. There's a lot of information out there printed about this, and make your own assessment. And if you disagree with me, let me know, because I'll disagree with me until we figure out who's missing something. I've been looking at this for a good 12 to 15 years since I had my motorcycle business. And I've my objective was to always put every belief on trial for its life, because I'm looking for ways to show that this doesn't work. And that's how I was able to come up with a way of explaining it all without resorting to the woo-woo. In the spiritual area, it's the interaction with the higher self. So these three things, what we're doing is we're going from a world where people are walking around with the subconscious being in charge, and then the conscious mind is below it. And sometimes people think that the subconscious is also the higher self. What we're doing is putting that in the right order. So you got your higher self, then that can help you program the programmer. We have our conscious mind, which directs the subconscious, because the subconscious is so fast. It's like having a staff of 100,000 people, and you can direct them as to what to do and what to focus on. But because we've let the subconscious be up here, it's dictating it. And guess what? The subconscious dictates based on threats. It's looking for what's dangerous and what's scary out there. And that's what it has us reacting to, which is why people can get triggered. If you've ever seen anyone get triggered, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And it's very difficult to talk them back off the ledge once they do get triggered. And then the emotional area, we need to maintain a growth mindset. So there's two parts to the emotional area. One is we want to be in the right state so we're not easily triggered. But then when we get triggered, we want to be able to reverse that very quickly. We don't want to like sit there and end up, I mean, there are people who stay, I'm not going to say in a triggered state, but they get into an unresourceful state for days and weeks, months even. They just get unresourceful. They'll put labels on it. And again, this is not mental health. They'll put labels on it. And the thing is, the more you stay in an unresourceful state, what do you think increases? The unresourcefulness. Or let me put it a different way. What do you think decreases? The longer you stay in an unresourceful state, the resourcefulness decreases. And you need resourcefulness to access a growth mindset. So it's some of these chicken and egg things, which the good news is I've solved them for you, and I have it in a way that will work. And it doesn't require a lot of effort. It does require the hard stuff, which is letting go of some of your long-standing beliefs that you know don't work anyway. So mental, fast and slow thinking. This is the first step in helping people discern the difference between the conscious and the unconscious or subconscious. The conscious mind, as I said, is slow compared to the subconscious. It processes at 50 bits per second. Reaction time of about a half a second. Versus the subconscious, which processes at about 11 million bits per second. 11 million bits per second. So by the time the reaction time is about a quarter of a second. So by the time the conscious mind is aware of what's going on, the subconscious has already had the opportunity to process up to 3 million bits. You see this in athletics, where you can see that quick response from the subconscious, and people call it muscle memory. Well, it's not really muscle memory, it's nervous system memory, because the nerves signal the muscle and the muscle does the action. The same way that you have what we call muscle memory, which I'm saying is nervous system memory, we can apply that to our thoughts. We can apply it to our speaking. So you can practice saying things the way you want to say them and create nervous system memory around that. That's why salespeople, we always push them to practice out loud. We always push them to role play, and they don't want to do it. This is why the going old school guys back into the early 1900s, this has gone for a whole century. They still believe it, that when you practice your presentation, practice it out loud. Why? Because you're speaking, and by speaking, you're creating nervous system memory, and then it just comes out. People who've been public speaking have experienced this. They're up on stage and they're talking, and next thing you know, words just start coming out of their mouth. Now, you can say that's coming from some higher plane, but I can also explain how it's coming because of your million bits per second. To give you an idea of the subconscious, most of us have experienced this. You fall off some object, a high object, right? And on the way down, it seems like your life flashes before your eyes. Sometimes it happens if a person's in an accident or something like that. If life flashes before their eyes. My opinion, my view is that they are scanning their entire the entire database to figure out how to survive this fall. To put that 250 milliseconds into perspective, a cat, and you've seen these cats, how fast they can jump, 50 to 80 milliseconds. Dogs are more like 150 milliseconds, and athletes who train on reaction time can get their speed down into that 150 millisecond range. Like Formula One drivers, I would say, are there. Some of your running backs are probably there because they spot the hole and then they go. So there's a book by Daniel Kahneman. He wrote around 2000 and 2012. Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow is the title. I read it back then, and then I looked at it again when I was doing this work to see, and he doesn't quite get there to say that the fast thinking is the subconscious. He walks right up to that line, and I'm going to clarify that, because most of your literature says that the subconscious is a mind. I'm telling you that it's not a mind. Once you decide it's not a mind, it's a network of neurons, dominoes start to fall, and they just keep falling because all those dominoes were propped up by this belief that the subconscious was a mind. So here's what's going on. Most people are familiar with the stimulus response. And we call it as stimulus response. I'm calling it stimulus reaction response. So you have your stimulus, and if you read Atomic Habits by James Clear, he talks about a cue. Well, that would be the stimulus. And then you have a reaction time of the subconscious, 250 milliseconds. Another quarter of a second, the conscious mind comes online, but the reaction, for most of us, this is why 95% of our lives are run by habit. For most of us, the reaction is already in play, and that reaction then equals the response. So the stimulus equals the response, or the stimulus leads to the response. What I'm saying is the stimulus leads to a reaction, and the reaction leads to a response. So I said there's 4 steps that we're going to talk about. So and those steps have to do with putting pauses in between the stimulus and the response. And by the way, if most of your conditioning came from age 0 to 7, and we're living in a completely different time, what you decide is probably not the best thing for today. In the world of VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, there's so much going on, right? This whole thing here of deciding and acting and then speaking and then fight or flight, freeze or withdraw, we need to update that. The other problem that occurs with this reaction to response is that because we think the subconscious is a mind, we therefore think that that first reaction is a mind. That first reaction is from the network of neurons, but it's an electrical impulse. It's energy. Thought at its most base form is energy. This is why it's so easy to confuse the two. It's so easy to think that the subconscious impulses are actually me thinking. That's why you want to learn to tell the difference. And they do have a different signature, and you can tell what your real thoughts are, and you can tell what your subconscious impulses are. And as I said, the easy way to get there is by speed. If it's coming at you lightning speed, like your light flashing before your eyes speed, you're pretty much guaranteed it's the subconscious. And then if you're having to think through and look at this and look at that, it's probably the conscious mind, because the conscious mind is able to keep multiple thoughts in its space at one time, whereas the subconscious, it's one set of impulses firing at a time. So as I said, here's the couple of different steps we're adding. So there's my stimulus, there's your reaction, and there's your response. So this is the first set that we're setting in. You got a step here. And we want to make this a defined step. You want to notice, what is your reaction? What's your first reaction? Think about your life flashing before your eyes. When you're falling off of a building, or off of a roof. You don't have the time to do a lot of assessing. But in life, when something comes up, an opportunity shows up or a threat shows up, and the light flashes before your eyes equivalent, you're looking at that. What's the reaction? What is the reactive suggestion that I should do? It's this. Now you can assess it. Make that just a data point. This reaction is just a data point. You do not want that to be the end all be all, because it's not from your mind. It's from a network of neurons. By definition, it's from the past. Associations are from the past. These are associations. This is equivalent to that or connected to that. You can create associations in the future by visualizing. Those are called implementation intentions. You can actually help yourself by deciding, when this happens, I'm going to do that. When that happens, I'm going to do this. By practicing, and this is where role playing comes in, you are literally building in associations in the future. But for the majority of your associations, they're from the past. So therefore, it should be a data point, especially if you're building something new. And if you're in a growing or a fast growing company, you're scaling, or maybe you're looking for a different job, maybe you're in the job market, everything you're doing is different than what it was before. And because VUCA is happening so rapidly, it's even more different every year this year than it was 2 decades ago. So just let that sink in. All right, now I'll come back to the pre-stimulus, but pre-stimulus can actually start happening days in advance. And this is a powerful thing because it includes priming. And then you have cognitive biases, you have self-control, you have triggers, you have people in a fixed mindset. If you're in a fixed mindset and you get a stimulus, your reaction is going to be very different than if you're in a growth mindset. This is why they say you can't create good work from a fixed mindset or a state of unresourcefulness, because what's allowed to come through, you're rejecting the good stuff. I'm simplifying things here, but I want to keep moving along. Now, the mental area, to wrap that up, will tell you that, let me see what's, yeah. So in the mental area, self-determination theory, this is a powerful, quick summary for you in terms of selling or leading. Self-determination theory says that humans need have three major needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. When you have these needs met, you get intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation means they like the activity. Most people stop at intrinsic motivation comes from inside. Yes, it comes from inside, but it's coming from inside because they're enjoying the activity. I use the example of motorcycle riders. You don't need a destination. Anywhere is good enough. That's why they ride 60 miles to go have breakfast. It doesn't really matter. You just want to be riding because it's so enjoyable. This is why you end up touring. You have so many guys into sport touring. My business was based on that. Guys would ride 10 days, 300 miles a day, different twisties every day. It's like being on a roller coaster the whole time, but you're in control. They enjoy it. So the autonomy, agency, and choice. You have to have agency, and then you have to exercise that agency. Competence, feeling capable. And as a leader, you want to make sure you're creating an environment where these things are present. And then relatedness, being seen and heard. So the physical area, some cognitive processing is physiological. I would say the majority of it is, because the majority, especially for people who are just starting to enter into this work, because it's mostly they're listening to the signals from the network of neurons. And the neurons, the impulses going through the neurons is not physiological. We can call it neurobiological, but the neurons themselves, that's physical. If a person dies, their body is on Earth, as is their brain, which, by the way, in the brain is 86 billion neurons. And then throughout the nervous system in the body is another 14 billion. Those 100 billion neurons are on the ground. The mind and the soul and the spirit, however you want to define those, that's not there in that body. That's gone. So I would say the subconscious is largely physiological, because without the neurons, the impulse can't get through. And this is what happens when with deep practice, you build up those networks stronger and stronger and stronger. And it's what happens when you get a break. If you could separate the synapse, and that's what happens. It's called synaptogenesis. When you're replacing habits, the synaptogenesis is literally eliminating the synapse between the old neural pathways and creating it for the new. And this is why replacing a habit is so much more effective than trying to break a habit. And then myelin wraps the neuron so that the impulses go faster with more accuracy and with more strength. And this is why habits become difficult to break when you're going directly at the habit, which is why you want to replace it, because, and that's deep practice. Deep practice builds that myelin wrapping. Impulses through the neurons are similar to thoughts. Fast thinking is the subconscious processing. Now you're starting to see why it's so fast, because it's energy flowing through the neurons, whereas your conscious mind is literally having to think through things. And with 100 billion neurons, it's got to be very efficient. Each neuron is connected with thousands of other neurons. And so the efficiency is way up there. The objective is to learn the difference and then have them not only work together, but to have the conscious mind in charge of the subconscious. That's the objective. So this is where we were. A pause of 1 second is going to make a difference. Now, we've got to deal with this pre-stimulus, but taking the pre-stimulus aside for a moment, you have the stimulus and then you have the reaction. And that's a quarter of a second. And then another quarter of a second, you have your response. If you pause for a second, you give your conscious mind a full half second to assess what's going on. And as you teach yourself to do this, what you'll find is this subconscious is not just doing willy-nilly stuff. Instead of off and running, chasing things like a puppy, it's feeding you information for your assessment. It's giving you the reaction. And if you take that reaction as your thought and you run with it, then it's just going to reinforce that. But if you take that reaction as a data point, and now you want to assess other things, just like ChatGPT, you put in new prompts, it gives you new information. Put in a different prompt, it gives you new information. It didn't give you that information before because you didn't prompt it with that. By looking at it as a data point, you now are prompting it to give you additional information. So it's not just feeding you what normally would come through the reticular activating system in that circumstance. You're telling it what to feed you. So it's taking its 11 million bits of information that it can process per second, and it's filtering out those pieces that you need. Two types of reframing. I won't get into this, but I'll, do a screenshot. This is context reframing. So reframing is a step. The reason I'm not spending a lot of time on it is something that you can do once you get a handle on this. But if you're in trigger mode, reframing is going to be very difficult. Transformational vocabulary is another one of the empowerment catalysts. It's very difficult because you're being triggered. But reframing does help because you look at it differently. It's like shifting the perspective. When you shift the perspective, you shift the meaning. The challenge is when you're so deep in, if you're in a fixed mindset, it's very difficult to do that, or very difficult to get the result from that. And then you have a meaning reframe. So you could change the context and you could change the meaning. Take a screenshot if you like. And then we have now I wanted to talk about this area here, the priming. Look at this. Priming is your environment, what's been going on, who you're with. This is why they say a person who's living with somebody who's very erratic, they can cause them to have mental health issues as well. Cognitive biases. This is actually happening in the network of neurons because it's the association. So you have priming, and then there's associations that come into play because of the priming. And now your cognitive biases trigger because of that. So that's all physiological. I would say the social influence, again, that's your environment, physiological. Your discomfort and comfort, physiological. Environment, physiological. Culture, it, depends on how you want to look at it, but I would say the internal workings of an organization is the external environment of the people in it. And if you have a toxic culture, it's the internal workings of the organization creating that toxicity, the way they've set things up. And then the people who are in it are reacting to that toxicity. And then you have stress responses, the same hammer that shatters the steel, the same hammer that shatters the glass forges the steel. So depending on how these people are wired, they respond differently. That's why some people will thrive in an environment that for other people, it's completely disempowering. that whole thing, the same hammer that shatters the glass forges the steel. So you don't know what people are bringing to the table. And then we have our attention and focus, and we could say that's part mental, but I would also say it's part physiological, because I can literally shift my attention and look at something else. If I don't like what I'm seeing over there, I can look at something else and focus on that, and get clear on what I'm looking at over there, and it moves that out of play. Easier to do that on the early stage of this stimulus response. Once the response, if it's a triggered response, the deeper you go into that response, obviously it's going to be harder. And then anxiety and stress, well, we've all experienced probably that anxiety spiral. And this is like mob mentality of the neurons just firing and wiring. I spend more time on this stuff in the workshop. I'm going through quickly now because I want to cover all of the pieces. We talked about the reframing already. And now we have, if when you're thinking about the physical, because remember, I'm going through the mental, physical, spiritual, emotional, and we want to neutralize an adverse pre-stimulus, or I'm sorry, to neutralize the adverse pre-stimulus, physically shift your physical attention. I just mentioned that. But when you're thinking about the physical area, you want to be thinking about the five senses. It makes sense, right? That's physiological. And then we have the spiritual area. Let's see how I'm doing on slides. We have the physiological, the spiritual area, awareness by your higher self. I'm going to do a quick bonus on this one. I talked about the woo-woo gaps already, talked about that. Honoring the present moment is how we are going to tackle or leverage the spiritual area. It's the field of infinite possibilities. This is why you want to have the higher self, because it has this awareness, and use the higher self to program the programmer, which is a program, the programmer. Yeah, the subconscious being the programmer. And then we want to use our higher self to retrain the subconscious and put the automaticity of the subconscious to work for us. That automaticity is what's been working against us sometimes, because it's based on conditioning from 0 to 7, and we're trying to do something new 30, 40, 50 years later. Quick bonus here. I want to do something. Awareness is a very, very powerful tool. It's underrated. And I use the example that you're aware that you're listening to my voice, and you are aware that I'm speaking about awareness and telling you that you're aware that I'm talking about awareness, right? We can go aware. But I wanted to give you an exercise. So this is, take something easy, simple, nothing difficult. I want you to think about something you've been struggling with for 10 years and you don't know why. It's a belief, a deep-seated belief. Obviously, it keeps showing up, but something easy. And I want you to label that, kind of describe it in your mind. You don't really have to close your eyes if you can. Obviously, if you're driving, don't do it. If you want to stop, whatever. But give it a description. This is something you've been struggling with, and it actually might even get in the way of you pursuing your dreams. When I show you this, think in terms of this thing. It's keeping you here and you want to go here, but this thing is preventing you from doing that, either because you're scared to do it, or you believe this is not available to you, or you believe you can't handle what's up there, or you believe you're just not good enough, however that is. So now you have this belief. What I want you to do is imagine yourself going into a movie theater. Let's do this real time. This is not an intellectual exercise. We're actually dealing with the subconscious. Go and imagine yourself being in a movie theater. You're there by yourself and you choose a seat right in the middle. You're in the middle of the movie theater and the screen is blank. Then all of a sudden on the screen, it comes up, the life of your name, the full life of your name. And then at that moment, I want you to come out of yourself. So you leave yourself in the middle of the movie theater. You come out of yourself and go up to the projection booth. So now you are watching yourself in the movie theater, watching the screen. You are watching yourself watch the screen. Now start the movie. And the movie is going through. This is like the light flashing before your eyes. But what you're going to do is you're going to look for that time that you first noticed this limiting factor, this whatever it is that you described. So go through your life. Find the first time that you observed it. Notice the year, notice your age. Now we want to check it. Do it again. Watch yourself, watch the screen, and start your life and run through again and come up with the first time that you had that experience or that you remember that limiting factor. You got it? Okay. Now, I want you to look at what was around you at that time. You watching yourself, watch yourself. What what happened to create that belief or that factor? Was anybody there telling you that this is how it was? Was there anything around that linked up? Okay, I want you to just write those down. And what we're going to do now is, hold on a second, get my slides organized here. All right. What I want you to do is I want you to call that a belief. So that whatever that is, that's a belief. And in this case, it's a limiting belief. Let's assume it's a limiting belief because it's been stopping you from making that trajectory. Now, what are some things that you've chosen to do or not do? Just think about those. You've chosen to do them or not do them. These are different things that are associated with this belief. Got it? Now, what we'll do is imagine this is a table and you've stacked these things that you've chosen to do, these decisions you've made onto this table. And when somebody starts talking to you about changing your belief, it's like, how can I change my belief when I've done all these things? So now you're starting to see some of the resistance to changing your belief. And when you ask yourself questions like, hold on a second. When you start to ask yourself, when you start to ask yourself questions like, why can't I do this? You automatically come up with answers because there's no way that your subconscious is going to want you to undo all of this. So what I want you to think about, that table has legs. And these legs are the references. Remember what was around you, what led you to come up with that belief, what were the factors that were in play? Those are the references. Now I want you to looking at it with your conscious mind today and being objective, watching yourself, watch yourself. Are those things still true today? Those references that happened then, are they still true? I told you to start with something small, so we're not talking anything major here. Now what we're going to do, it's still difficult to move all these things that you've stacked on this table. But what we're going to do is we're going to set up another table, new belief. And your new references. And what I'm giving you today, these could be references if you choose to accept them. And now what you can do is very quickly start moving these things over to that new belief table. It's no longer difficult. So that was a really quick exercise. Normally that takes a little bit longer, but I wanted to give you a sense and have you walk away with something that you actually can do starting right away. What happened? There we go. All right. So that should make this curve a little bit easier to navigate. It should make this curve a little bit easier to navigate. All right. Now, here's the typical stimulus response. Normally, what we're going to do is retrain the subconscious to scan for the positives. Typically, it's scanning for the negative 70%. We want it to scan for the positive 70%. A very small percentage of what people worry about ever comes to pass. So why spend all that time in stress response by letting it scan for the threats? We're going to retrain it to scan for the positive. That's something we'll do in the workshop. I don't have time to do that now. And then I take a screenshot of this. As I mentioned, there's resistance factors and empowerment catalysts. I have a couple of dozen for each of the areas: mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional. And what I'm doing when I work with the client, I'm looking for what are some of these resistance factors, and then I use an appropriate empowerment catalyst. But these are some universal empowerment catalysts that if you do these, you're going to start improving what's going on. Now, the scanning for the positive, teaching your subconscious to scan for the positive, what we're going to do is that actually changes the reaction. So by this time, we've already worked on the pre-stimulus. So you're not being affected by priming and cognitive biases, not adversely anyway. And now we have this stimulus. But what we've done is in this first quarter of a second, we've reconditioned the subconscious to scan for the positive 70% instead of the threat 70%. So by scanning for the positive, your reaction is more likely to be aligned with what you want to do. Instead of stop, no, house is on fire, it's yes, this is going to work. And then you have the reaction is going to be different. So I have positive expectancy, benefits, gratitude, abundance. This is because of the positivity exercise that we do. And then you have your assessment. Remember, I said if you can just pause a second, it really only takes a half a second. Now we're adding a half second onto this quarter of a second. We're still only at 3/4 of a second. So it's not like we've added a lot of time, and it's not any longer than that's all it takes. That's enough to make the subconscious reaction a data point, and then have your conscious mind assess. And then we're going to move along. So that's basically the 4 steps. This is the positivity drill. Basically what you're doing, I'll skip here, and then you could take a screenshot of this. The conditioning drill summary is 3 times a day. You're going to come up with 3 negative experiences. In that case, there was the flat tire. And this is not positive mental attitude. It's not reframing. You come up with a negative experience. I have a flat. And then quickly flash to the bigger positive context, which is I have a car. In other words, you couldn't get a flat tire if you didn't have a car, and getting a car was once one of your goals. So immediately what you're doing, and you do this for 6 weeks, 3 times a day, 2 or 3 times per session. So with meals, it takes you less than 2 minutes. You think about a negative experience that's happened recently, immediately flash to the bigger positive context. It gets easier, you get faster. And then do the next one and the next one. And then next meal, you do it 3 times again. What you're doing is you're retraining the unconscious that when it sees a threat or something negative, to first scan to see if there's a bigger positive context that it's part of. Because most of the bad things that happen to us are happening to us because we're in a bigger positive context. You burn the food. Yeah, the bigger context is you have enough money to buy food. You stub your toe. The bigger positive context, you're happy you can walk. I mean, you can just be ridiculous about it. You can be philosophical about it. But what you're doing is you're training the subconscious to do that quickly. That's the positivity that gives you this step right here. All right. And then we have the final area is the emotional. So the emotional area by now, we should have had everything in place. We shouldn't be hijacked. We're getting to this place down here. But every once in a while, you'll still get something that slips through and bam, you're hijacked. So what Dr. Joan Rosenberg in a book, 90 Seconds to a Life You Love, she talks about these 8 negative emotions as representing all the negative emotions. And what she's wanting to do is get rid of all this just anxiety, right? Anxiety could just be everything. And anxiety is now, if you have 100 billion neurons and anxiety is connected with all these neurons, it's like, hold on a second. Anxiety is connected to all these neurons. You can see how you can get into an anxiety spiral. But by labeling it and coming to these 8, you label it, now you can actually do something about it. Now, the idea with emotions is that you don't want to harbor them. You don't want to dwell on them. Emotion should be passing through. Think energy in motion. Just let it pass through. It's there to teach you something, and it's there to get your attention, but you're not supposed to dwell on it. If you dwell on that energy passing through, you're going to turn it into a feeling, and then that feeling becomes a biochemical event or a neurobiological event, and that gets lodged in your neurons, and it's ready to be called up at a moment's notice, but usually for the wrong reason. So what we're doing now is we're taking this potential hijacking step and we're giving you this emotional modulation step right there. And you want to locate the emotion, then you want to label it. So where is it in your body? If you do it right now, just think about a negative experience that happened in the past. Where is it in your body? Label it with one of these. Is it sad? Because what you would do for sadness might be different than what you do for helplessness, which might be different than what you would do for embarrassment, and so on. Especially when you get to the next step. What is it there to teach you? What are you there to learn? What is it teaching you? What are you supposed to learn from it? So 3 L's: locate, label, learn. And start small, but practice. You want to practice this. I guarantee you today, you're going to have something that makes you go, oh man, whatever that is, just do it with that. Locate it. Okay. Where's that oh man feeling coming from? Where is it in my body? Label it. What is it? Is it sadness? Oh, it's just embarrassment. I wish I didn't do that thing. What can I learn from it? Well, make sure that the thing is not there, and then you won't be able to do the thing. Whatever. Practice it small. And so when the big thing happens, and now what's going to happen is the reason why we have it as this wave is because when you let these emotions flow through this 90 seconds, it is like cresting a wave. You'll feel it, like it'll rise. And it's why we try to suppress them. You don't want to suppress some emotions, because when you suppress negative emotions, you're also suppressing your ability to experience joy, the positive emotions. But you want to ride that and just let it go and breathe. Just do some breathing and don't try to suppress it. And you'll find out that the emotion is energy emotion. It flows through and it's gone. So practice that. And then when the big time, when you really need it, it's there. So we've already done this. We talked about that. Now you have the ability to break through, right? We have a different stimulus response approach. We're getting rid of the priming, or now resetting the priming to what serves us. And now we're getting rid of the triggering. Well, first we have positive expectancy. So we're not being triggered. And then we have the emotional modulation. So when you're getting into situations, we're able to handle them. That gives you that belief, that confidence. And we also did the bonus of getting rid of not getting rid of, but at least identifying limiting beliefs. Here's what it looks like. You're going along and you're bounded with the upper limit and the lower limit, and you're just happy through life. It's the past equals the future and everything's fine. And you start trying to go across this upper line. You find out it's not a line, it's a barrier. This is what Joe Dispenza calls crossing the river. And you've got these habit patterns and stories and getting cheated, all this stuff. You've had good experiences. The good experiences are in there. And it's because it works so well, you never want to try anything else. You have, could be violence, bad experience, whatever is in here, getting bullied, all of that stuff is in here. And it's why it's so hard getting across that barrier. And people try and stop, try and stop, try and stop, try and stop. There's a cognitive dissonance occurs that when you're in there, because this cognitive dissonance is such that you're trying to break through it, but at the same time, you're doing something that you believed was always impossible. And then when you do break through, it's not over, right? Now you have the unfamiliar and the unknown, and the subconscious looks at the unknown and the unfamiliar as a threat. And what we're going to do is focus on strengths, consistency, and simplicity. And when working with business people, we focus on principles. There's enough research out there that you replace the habits with principles. So you're not looking for past associations. You're not trying to make it up and let the conscious mind be as fast as the subconscious. What we're doing is we're applying principles, and we design principles into it. We actually, I call it guiding principles in the design tool, guiding principles. And that way, you know what to do. You don't look to your associations. And what's the interesting thing that happens is the same way that the subconscious was keeping you in this comfort zone. Now the subconscious is reminding you about the principles and the best practices, because it still wants you to survive. It never did want to hurt you. It's just that it's had a convoluted way of keeping you alive. And that way was keeping you in the past. I talked about VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. That noise, it could, opportunities can be distracting. Threats obviously can be distracting. And then I want you to think about it in terms of you're tightly in this narrow range of principles and best practices, and you're going to have some pivots, and then operational excellence, and then periods of pivot and operational excellence. And you want to have a way of designing these and not run too long, but not react too quickly. And you'll get narrower and narrower. This is like the flywheel that Jim Collins talks about in the book Good to Great. So I already talked about projects and pivots and operational focus. And then those are the shifts: conscious versus subconscious, rethinking in the physical area, rethinking cognitive processing, that most of the cognitive processing, what we know as cognitive processing, is physiological. Interacting with the higher self and letting the higher self program the programmer, and then maintaining a growth mindset. Again, I've got a workshop on the 17th. You can go to my LinkedIn profile or go to this website right here, this link, and you can sign up, and we'll go in depth. These slides, this is the content, but we'll do it step by step, because when we do practices and exercises, and then use that to apply it to the next one, and then we use that and apply it to the next one. All right, so that is it. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will hope to see you in the workshop next week. Take care.